Well, good morning, friends. It's great to be here with you. The psalm that we have for this morning is Psalm 116. So I will read this psalm for us, and then we'll unpack it together and see what it means for us in our lives, and hopefully we can see Jesus in this text along the way. So if you would, direct your attention to the screen. Psalm 116. I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and my pleas for mercy, because he inclined his ear to me. Therefore, I will call on him as long as I live. The snares of death encompassed me. The pangs of Sheol laid hold of me. I suffered distress and anguish. Then I called on the name of the Lord. O Lord, I pray, deliver my soul. Gracious is the Lord and righteous. Our God is merciful. The Lord preserves the simple. When I was brought low, he saved me. Return, O my soul, to your rest, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with you. For you have delivered my soul from death, my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. I believed, even when I spoke, I am greatly afflicted. I said in my alarm, all mankind are liars. What shall I render to the Lord for all his benefits to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. O Lord, I am your servant, the son of your maidservant. You have loosed my bonds. I will offer to you the sacrifice of thanksgiving and call on the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people, in the courts of the house of the Lord, in your midst, O Jerusalem. Praise the Lord. So friends, this is God's word. And I was reminded as I was preparing this sermon of the words of the Scottish writer and politician, a guy named Andrew Fletcher, who once said, "Let me write the songs of a nation. I care not who writes its laws." Right? Let me write the songs of a nation. I care not who writes its laws. And he said that as a way to reveal to us just the power and the formational control that music plays in our lives, that when it comes to our signature moments, our highs, our lows, even just our daily lives when we're working, our 9 to 5s, there's nothing that is so powerful or so moving to us as music. Like, I would go as far as to say that when you're at your job and you're just trying to shoot emails or complete your projects, right? You're not listening to the Constitution or the Bill of Rights in the background, right? You probably have your work flow, your acoustic, your musical score playing on in the background. Or when you're going through a breakup, like, you're not trying to find what statute might give you comfort. You're leaning into the music of Taylor Swift or Olivia Rodrigo, or or in a city like Madison, you're not going to have crowds that will sell out Camp Randall to hear Supreme Court judgments. Although it is Madison, like, you might get a decent crowd for that kind of thing. But you're going to have people sell out stadiums to listen to Morgan Wallen or Coldplay in a couple weeks. There's something about the formative power of music that gives voice to our emotions, to our experiences, that nothing else in this world can. And so it's no coincidence that when God gave his people a book to let us know who he is and what he has done, it's not a mistake that the largest book within this series of books that God gave us is the Psalms, the song book, the soundtrack of the people of God. And within the 5 books of the Psalter itself, you have in book 5, which is where Psalm 116 is found, you have a couple of playlists within the playlist. So in Psalm 120 to 134, you have what you can call the road trip playlist of God's people. These were the songs of ascent that they would sing to one another as they traveled from wherever they were to Jerusalem for their high feasts and holidays. Psalm 116, which we just read, is contained in a different playlist. And you could call this the dinner playlist of God's people. That when God's people came together in Jerusalem for these feasts, particularly the Feast of Passover, this would be one of the songs that they would sing together as a way to remind themselves of who God is and what God has done. And when you read through the book of Psalms, you'll sometimes see a superscription over the top of the psalm, this small writing, all caps. And these aren't things that an editor put in there. These are things that the psalmist wrote as a way to kind of set the tone or set the mood for the psalm. So sometimes you'll see who the author is. Sometimes you'll see the occasion that prompted the writing of the psalm. So for instance, in Psalm chapter 3, the first time we run into one of these superscriptions, we read that it's a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. And so these superscriptions are meant to one, both, first give you an idea of who wrote the song, and then second, to kind of give you the situation or the frame of mind that the psalmist was in when they wrote those words. And so if I remember right, you all at Harvest explored the life of David not too long ago, and so you might remember the dynamic that David had with the son Absalom, and in fact, when David had to flee from him and run away. And so when he's writing Psalm 3, we know that David is in distress, he's anxious, he's fearful, he's worried about his future, he's even worried about his son. And so sometimes the Psalms give us these extra bits of details to help us know what our emotional register should be as we read the songs. But as you noticed in Psalm 116, it doesn't have that superscription. So we don't know who wrote the song or what the occasion was, but that doesn't stop Bible scholars from trying to guess or speculate what that might be. And so one person suggests that Psalm 116 is a song of David, maybe when he's fleeing from Saul and he finally experiences the deliverance of, Saul is no longer trying to hunt him down and pursue him and try to kill him. Another commentator suggests that maybe this is a song of King Hezekiah, so one of Judah's kings in the 8th century when the nation of Assyria is at their doorstep, ready to lay siege and ready to lay waste to the land, but God miraculously delivers Hezekiah and the people of Judah. But while we can't say for certain, the bottom line is that I think the anonymity of Psalm 116, the fact that we don't know who wrote it or what the situation is, I want to suggest it's good news for us this morning because we can use this song and write our experiences into the story. That the fact that this psalm doesn't have an author sort of unlocks it and allows us to find ourselves in the life of the psalmist, to put the words of the author on our lips as we talk to God about our deliverance experiences. And that's what Psalm chapter 116 is about. It starts off in verse 4 as a prayer, right? The psalmist says, Lord, deliver my soul from death. Please help me and come to my aid. And throughout the rest of the song, the psalmist is saying, God, you did exactly that. You delivered my soul from death, my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling, and I get to walk in the land of the living in your presence once again. And so we can use the words of Psalm 116 to add color and life to our deliverance experiences in our lives, great and small. When we experience a pleasant surprise, when we were expecting danger or defeat, when we got relief, when we were expecting the worst or expecting moments of despair, we get to sing this song about the times where we experienced freedom and deliverance when we thought nothing was going to come. And so the psalmist is singing personally about a deliverance from death, and maybe you have an experience like that. Be a great icebreaker in your community groups this week. Tell me about your near-death experience. But this could be a great way to give voice to some of the deliverance experiences in your life, whether that was finding a job after a long season of unemployment, or getting a clear scan when you were having a health scare, or getting out from under internet bullying or racial exclusion or anxiety or isolation when you've come to a new city or even to a new church. And even more, I think Psalm 116 gives us a set of templates through which we can look at our lives to make sense of those moments of deliverance we experience in our lives, but also to help us see how these small acts of freedom or liberation or deliverance in our lives are actually signposts and pointers to a greater deliverance, an ultimate deliverance that came when Jesus came 2,000 years ago. And so in our time together, I want us to look at the two templates that Psalm 116 gives us. The first one is a way to process our deliverances, and then the second is how Psalm 116 is a template that points to a greater deliverance. So we'll look at Psalm 116 as a template to help us process our deliverances, and then Psalm 116 as a template that points to a greater deliverance. And so let's first see how this psalm gives us a template to process our deliverance stories. So first, let's consider this idea of deliverance, because I've used that word a lot in this sermon already, and if I managed to take a guess, you probably haven't used that word a lot in 2025, maybe not at all. And so I think it's good for us to get to the bottom when I talk about our deliverance experiences. What am I getting at? And while you may not use the word deliverance regularly, it's not a part of your vocabulary, a variation of it is. Like, I would take a guess right now that on your phone are full of emails and notifications about items that have been safely delivered to your doorstep, right, from Amazon or, from, Target or wherever it is that, you talk about how when something is delivered to your house, think about it, like this thing was liberated from the tyranny of the factory and put on a ship and crossed the ocean, sometimes, from the other side of the world, and it goes from ship to port to fulfillment center to van, all the way to your front door with a picture on your phone to prove that it made it safely, all without skipping a beat. And it makes you just stand in awe of the supply chain, right? How things that we can just order and overnight shows up at our doorstep. And I even felt this more acutely, where I wish consumer air travel worked a lot more like ordering off of Amazon. My travel back from General Assembly in Tennessee took an extra 16 hours because of delays and weather and all that. And so you get a greater appreciation for the supply chain and how things can get delivered to your door, oftentimes from the other side of the world. And what Psalm 116 is saying, that every deliverance is massive. Like every act of deliverance didn't just happen. There was an intention behind the deliverances that we experience in our lives. And so, you think about how 1,000 million little things could have gone wrong in that whole process of the supply chain, but it made it to your door. And if you think about our lives and every good thing that happens to us, the job we get wasn't just because you were accomplished or you had the grades or you had the resume or things just fell in your favor. Like you didn't just drift into the deliverance moments of your life. You're there because God is behind each and every one of those things, leading you through and leading you to each of those things. Every single deliverance is extraordinary. And that's what makes this psalm so important, because it's trying to draw that out for us, and it does so by giving us a template to process those moments in our lives. And here's how Psalm 116 does it. So the way that this psalm helps us process these things is by giving us language to re-narrate our deliverances, to re-narrate our lives. It gives us a vocabulary to retell the stories of salvation to our own hearts. And you notice that this is what the psalmist does in verse 7, right? You see in this psalm, he takes a moment to talk to his own soul, right? He says, "Return, O my soul, to your rest." So what's he doing here? The psalmist is talking to his heart, right? He's gone through this very, dramatic experience. He's almost died, right? Verse 3, he says, "The snares of death encompassed me. Death was wrapped around my neck." And in his distress, he begins to panic. And you can tell that he begins to panic because in verse 11, he just kind of blurts out in his frustration, "All mankind are liars," right? I can't trust anybody. He has this sense of fear and anxiety that makes him lose all perspective on his situation and on other people. And so when he is delivered, he takes a moment to talk back to his heart. He talks back to his soul and reminds himself of what's actually true. He tells himself that the danger is over and that he can be at rest. Why? Because God has delivered him, because God has brought him through. In other words, the psalmist is saying that deliverances in life don't just happen. You don't stumble from defeat into victory. You don't just happen upon a deliverance experience in your life. That deliverances come from somewhere, and they ultimately come from God. And so we need to train our hearts to acknowledge that and to articulate that truth to our hearts. In a lot of the counseling literature that I've read over the years being a pastor, one of the most important insights that I've taken away from that is that when it comes to our identity, our forming our sense of self and who we are, we're formed not just by our experiences, the things that happen to us, we're also shaped by the narratives that we construct around our experiences. So life is more than just the sum of the things that happen to you. Life is also about the story that you construct around your experiences, that you rehearse in your head and tell to your heart. And so all the time, we're not just experiencing things, we're forming a narrative and a story around the things that are happening to us and about other people. So, we encounter other people, and our experiences will help us lean towards one way to say, is this person trustworthy or are they untrustworthy? Are they helpful or are they someone to be avoided? Right? Our experiences develop a narrative around us about ourselves, about the world, and even about God. And we can come to God with these narratives around our experiences, and subtly our lives and the narratives that we create these kinds of answers about who God is Is God good, or is he vindictive? Is he near, or is he distant? Is he loving, or is he capricious? So when it comes to talking to our hearts, we need to understand that we're not just dealing with our experiences, we're dealing with our interpretation of our experiences. We're dealing with the narratives that we've formed and shaped that tell us who we are and tells us truths about what we think about the world. And so the psalmist is saying that we need to talk back to our hearts because we often interpret our lives through a very narrow pinhole. Right? We tend to focus just on ourselves or on our immediate vicinity and circumstances. And this psalm gives us language to burst through the pinhole and to look at life and to see God at work at all times and in all places and in every way. And the psalmist here, he re-narrates his deliverance. He talks about how he couldn't trust the people around him, how in his alarm he said all mankind are liars. But then he takes time to talk to his soul and remind him that God showed up for him. He says, you delivered my soul from death, right? I didn't do it. It didn't just happen. You saved my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling. Therefore, I will walk. I will live in light of you. See, the psalmist is connecting the dots from his deliverance experiences to the hand of the God from which that experience came. And so the psalmist re-narrates his life experience through what he knows to be true, to see that God was present behind it all, that it was God who had brought him through. And so all the words that he has at his disposal are the language of thanksgiving. And if we're going to re-narrate the experiences of our lives, the deliverance moments, we need to be familiar with the language of gratitude, with the language of thankfulness. And thankfulness is essential to re-narrating our own stories because all of us in our lives are dealing with our inner cynic. The essayist Maria Popova once said that gratitude is the silencer for cynicism. And in all of our lives, in each and every one of us, we have the little cynic that's on our shoulder, right? That's telling us that God hates us, that he's indifferent to us, that all this terrible stuff that's happening to you is because you're a failure or God wants to hurt you, that God is in the business of finding out the things that you love so that he can take them away and make your life miserable. The cynic in your heart and mind chooses to not see the bounty and the abundance and the generosity of God. And in doing so, it makes our view of the world narrower. It's like choosing to look through life through the pinhole. But in expressing our gratitude, we're able to see the world more fully, to actually see the world as it is. That gratitude expands our world because it recognizes a fact of life that for all of us in our individualistic age, we're so quick to forget, and that is that we're all dependent beings. There's a professor down in Tennessee named Kelly Kapic, and Kelly writes that the idea that we're a dependent being is actually etched into our biology through our belly button. Right? We came in the world as dependent beings, dependent on our mothers to enter the world, but that is just the first step in a life built on dependence upon other people. We have to look down every day and remind ourselves that we are people who need other people. And we need not just one another, but we also need God. And the more that we express our gratitude, the more that we begin to see how great God is and how much he is working in our lives. And there's this counterintuitive thing about gratitude that when you express your joy about something, it actually enhances your enjoyment of it. So for instance, I'm not sure, maybe you guys just came out of performance review season at your job. My wife recently came through her annual performance review, and she was telling me all the great things that her boss was saying to her. She crushed it this year, guys, like better than last year. And just hearing my wife talk about her boss's enjoyment of her, like increased my joy for my wife. Or if after the service and you see my daughter Emery running around, you just come up to me and tell her what a sweet and awesome kid she is. Like I'll say, yes, I agree, she's sweet and awesome, but it just enhances my love for her. Or if you're with a friend, you're hanging out with your group of friends, and one of your friends talks about how awesome your other friend is, like it makes you enjoy that friend all the more, right? And the same thing is true with God, that when we find ourselves praising God, we'll actually find ourselves enjoying him more. That as we celebrate God for who he is and what he's done, it will actually help us retrain our hearts and our affections to remind us of what is true about God. It'll help us enjoy him more fully and as he is. And so one of the questions for us this morning is, do you have a practice of expressing gratitude in your life? Do you have a practice of it could be, having a journal and writing down things that you're thankful for. It could be a practice of prayer. It could be even in a church service like we just did, singing the doxology and praising God, from whom all blessings flow. But did you know that this practice of gratitude also, apart from the spiritual component, which is, it's good for your soul, but sociology, there's studies that are starting to pile up that says, like, gratitude, having a regular practice of gratitude, on average makes you healthier, more productive, less anxious, less stressed. That there are material benefits in addition to the psychological and spiritual for having a practice of gratitude. And so what would it look like for you to take some time this week to sit down and reflect on all the ways that God has been good to you, the things that God has brought you through experiences great and small? Because we can connect the dots, just like the psalmist, back from everything that we've enjoyed, every good gift, every deliverance, to the hand of a loving God who delights to give good gifts to his children. That every instance we've avoided disaster and tragedy come from the hand of a loving God who cares for you. So that's the template that Psalm 116 gives us to process, to re-narrate our deliverance stories, as this language of gratitude. But let's also consider how Psalm 116 itself is a template that points to a greater deliverance to come. And if I were to summarize this point in one sentence, it'd be this: it's that every deliverance is a picture. Every deliverance is a picture. And every deliverance experience that we experience is a sign and a pointer to a greater deliverance to come. And I just want to say that there's this shadow that's hovering over Psalm 116, and maybe your inner cynic has drawn that to your attention right now, and that's this what the psalmist says here in verse 15. It says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. So, the psalmist here, he's only talking about one form of deliverance, right? He's talking about temporary deliverances, right? Not an eternal one. And the psalmist is only able to tell this happy story because he lived to tell the tale, right? And, you may not know this. Fun fact of the day. That psalmist that wrote Psalm 116, he died, right? He died about 2,500 years ago, so he's not around to tell you any more of his deliverance stories, right? He's not around to tell you any more about how good God has been to him. And we all know the same thing, right? Like I was reading in, social media this past week about earthquakes in the Dominican Republic and in Pakistan, and maybe you've experienced an earthquake, and hey, tell us that story of deliverance. You're here to tell the tale. But we also know that there are many people who did not survive that experience. Or if you have a car, statistics say that in America the average driver is in 3 to 4 car accidents during their lifetime, which is a lot. And maybe you've been in a car accident and you're here to tell the tale, but maybe you know somebody from high school, or maybe somebody in your circle who, that is not their story. Or maybe you had a brush with a serious diagnosis, whether that's cancer or some other chronic illness, and you experienced relief initially, but you know that relief from cancer or disease won't always come. And so, does our inner cynic win after all? Do these songs of deliverance sound a little empty and hollow because we know we're ultimately just moving deck chairs around the Titanic, that death will eventually come for us all and win and silence all our stories of deliverance? Well, what I want to say is no, that our cynic in death doesn't get the last laugh, because we know that someone else, someone greater than us, sang the words of Psalm 116, and that person is Jesus. I mentioned that Psalm 116 is part of the dinner playlist of God's people, that they would sing these songs together whenever they got together for the Passover. And we read in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 26 that after Jesus had the Passover meal with his disciples, we read that they sang a hymn and they departed for the Mount of Olives. And all the biblical commentators agree that it says when they sang a hymn, they sang Psalm 116. That they sang this song of deliverance right before Jesus was going to go to the cross, right? The psalmist isn't able to tell his stories of deliverance because he died, and we know that it didn't end well for Jesus initially, right? Jesus sang a song of deliverance, but he initially had to go through Good Friday and death on the cross and a silent Saturday. But we know that this song was transformed because of Easter morning, because of the Sunday where Jesus got up and got out of the tomb, that these songs of deliverance can no longer ring hollow, but there's actually depth and substance and meaning to them because they were sang on the lips of somebody who died and who rose again, who death has no hold on, whose sin has no sting in his life. And so think about it. Listen to this song again in light of Jesus' experience from Good Friday to Easter morning, right? Jesus says in verse 3, "The snares of death encompassed me. The pangs of Sheol laid on me. I suffered distress and anguish." Think of the Garden of Gethsemane. And then he says, "Then I called on the name of the Lord." In verse 8, Jesus says, "You've delivered my soul from death. You've delivered my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living forever." The resurrected Jesus says, "I'm never going to die again." You see, Jesus takes the words of Psalm 116, the words of a temporary deliverance, and he eternalizes them. He isn't just talking about a temporary or momentary deliverance. He takes these words and he stretches them out into eternity because of Easter morning. You see, deliverance came for Jesus, but it only came on the far side of a horrible death. And it's delayed until after its death, but his deliverance came, and when it came, it annihilated death itself. And so the sufferings of Psalm 116, no, it didn't happen to Jesus the way that suffering happens to us. Job says that man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. But Jesus Jesus chose to enter into a world of suffering. Suffering just happens to us, but Jesus could have stayed in heaven safe and in all comfort, away from all suffering, but Jesus chose to enter into our stories because he came to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. Jesus came to be the true and better Adam, to succeed in all the places where the first humans failed, where we all fail. He came to recapitulate our lives, our trials, our pains, and even experience death itself, with the enormous difference that, unlike us, Jesus never broke faith with God. And so it's by his innocent suffering that he's carried us through and will carry us through our hours, even our own suffering, even though our sufferings are deserved. And the psalmist says that, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. There was nothing more precious in God's sight than the death of this saint, his only son. And Jesus was ultimately vindicated by his Father when he raised from the dead. And so for all of us who are in Jesus, right, that same resurrection, that same deliverance, that same preciousness is applied to you and me because of our union with him, not because of anything we do, but because of what he has done. And we read in verses 18 and 19 that this hope that we have of walking in the land of the living takes on an added dimension when Jesus is talking about his deliverance. In verses 18 and 19, we read that in the courts of Jerusalem, Jesus says, "I'll pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all my people." And so Jesus is saying that, and he means that we'll be there with him, right? We'll be there in the new eternal order of things where death and sorrow and pain are carried away and experience no more. And this is the last thing I want to say about Psalm 116. I find that perhaps the most moving thing in this song is in verse 18. You can look at it again. When we hear Jesus singing, right, do you hear the joy in his voice? Like, can you listen? Can you kind of put your ear to the text and hear the joy in what Jesus is saying? He's saying, "I will pay my vows to God. I'll do it. I'm looking forward to this." There's joyful anticipation in the words of Jesus. You see, because Jesus isn't a bouncer, right? Like, Jesus isn't just standing at the gates of heaven and just begrudgingly letting people in at the end of their lives. Like, sometimes I think that the best thing that we get from Jesus is forgiveness, where he says, you've done all these things, you've messed up, we'll clean the slate, you're okay. Like, sometimes we think that the best we get from Jesus is forgiveness. But friends, that's not all we get from Jesus. The best thing that we get from Jesus isn't just forgiveness, it's delight. It's joy, it's desire. Jesus says, Jesus isn't like a bouncer waiting for us to come in. He's holding the door open for us. He says, "Come on in. Yes, please come. I went through all of this so that you could be here. Come in. Let me embrace you in my arms." We get more than Jesus' forgiveness. We get his welcome. We get his joy where he's singing songs over us because of all that he has done to make us his people. Because, friends, every deliverance is a picture. Every story of deliverance, however grand, however small, every new day that dawns, every close call that we avoid, every every time where we experience delight when we are anticipating disaster, every time we hear the words, I forgive you, from someone that we've wronged, every one of those reprieves, it becomes something in Jesus, something greater, and something much more significant than itself. Because every single deliverance is a picture of what Jesus has done for us. It becomes a promise of the deliverance to come. It becomes a guarantee of the end of all suffering, the end of all tears, all losses, all sickness and pain, and isolation and guilt, all shame and stumbling, and even from death itself. Because God has entered into our story, and he's sang this song alongside us. And because he has owned Psalm 116 as his own, and he's lifted us up out of our story and brought us into his, and in this story, it's too astonishing to be made up. It's too good to be true, because it's not just a story of forgiveness. It's a story of delight. It's a story of desire and belonging. It's the truest story of deliverance that's ever been told. So like the psalmist, let's give thanks to God. Let's enjoy him for who he is and what he's done, and give him thanks for all the deliverances of our life. Would you pray with me? God, we